18, 7:30. If you will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call,
If I may,
please.
yes, please. Art Cons.
Here.
Darrell Lewandowski.
Here.
TJ Malone.
Here.
Amber Long.
Here.
Bruce Reed. Here. Tom Guzzo.
Here.
And Dan McGarry.
Here.
All present and accounted for.
Excellent. Okay. Approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda for June 18th, 2018 as submitted.
Second. All those in favor of approving the agenda June 18th, 2018 as submitted, say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Okay, number 5, public comments. Mr. Walsey.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Hi, Planning Commission. Good evening. Question regarding the draft noise ordinance. The only way I was able to get the ordinance today was to come into the township and they were to print it out. I think, was this, anybody consider putting this online so the residents could review this prior to the meeting?
Thought we put it on that comment, I made a mistake.
It was in my agenda. Sorry, it was in my,
Was it online in the packet that was posted? It was supposed to be, if it wasn't, that was a mistake.
It was online.
We'll get it up there.
It was online?
Yes, I remember reading it before. Off computer.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't bring it up, so I'm hoping it was online because I think something this controversial, I think possibly you should include it in the newsletter so residents could be involved. I think the more resident input regarding any sort of a ordinance revision would be something you'd really look into. And my other comment is, from my experience and the number of people that I've spoke with throughout the township, there's basically 2 reasons people either live in Salem Township or move to Salem Township. And one is for the peaceful rural character, and the other one is to get away from other cities with more restrictive ordinances so they can have more freedom here in Salem Township. So this noise ordinance is going to be sort of a balancing act, and it's hard to have one without the other, and it's going to be tough. So I'm hoping you can set all the politics aside and do what's best in the best interest of our community in this regard. I'm also asking, after the board discussion on the noise ordinance, or during the discussion, will they allow resident input?
I'm just waiting for my turn. Is that
I'm finished.
any other public comment? Linda?
Do you want comment about the noise ordinance now, or will you have that discussion?
Good.
When?
I think, I want to say my minute or two, and then I'll answer your questions, but I just want to get them all out first, and then I'll respond.
Okay.
Mr. Horton? Oh, sorry, Linda. Are you done?
No, if you want questions. A couple of things about noise ordinances. They typically pit neighbors against each other. They give a reason why if I don't like someone, I can go after them. I think there's an issue in this community about how you enforce it. Most communities enforce it with a zoning compliance officer, which we don't have. I think that's a concern, and I just wonder how many of you have taken a look at just average activities and what a normal decibel level is for those. So just to share that, because I have done that. If you run your vacuum cleaner at 65 decibels, you have a gas-powered lawnmower at 74. If you have a snow blower, it's 84 decibels. Now you are proposing that we can't have noise between a certain time at night and 7 o'clock in the morning. A lot of my neighbors go to work before 7 a.m. and on a winter day and there's a heavy snow, they're gonna haul a snow blower out to clean their driveway so that they can get out to work. They would, I'm not sure if they're in compliant or not, I'm not sure if that's something that's exempt. But when you start to look at power tools, and a lot of people out here, if you go by there, they're working on their homes or they're putting up a pole barn. Power tools, a chainsaw, and this is its average, so it runs, there's a range on all these, but its average chainsaw is 104 decibels. You have to run a drill, 98 decibels. You run a sander, 97. And even if you had kids had a model airplane you modified, it's 103 decibels. And I would encourage you before you go into this, and it is extremely restrictive ordinance, and again, it is a balancing act. You can get an app for your iPad or your phone that measures decibels. And I would encourage every member of this planning commission to go through this community and simply look at what average activity is. We were at a graduation party on Saturday. It ended after your curfew. And I guess I have an issue with government now. It wants to give me a curfew here in Salem Township. I'm a grown-up. I want to have a party till 2 in the morning. That's my right. And I think that, again, I think that it's not Salem Township. I don't know where this came from. But it's a whole lot more than I think where Salem Township wants to go. Yes, you need to have something when you have a problem. So let's not penalize everybody because there's a problem. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I have a neighbor that doesn't live more than 100 feet from me that shoots a rifle that exceeds well over the 104 decibel at the property line. And I don't feel that, I feel that's a noise violation as well as a safety, but the sheriff told me they can't do anything about it. But when you have a rifle fire off all of a sudden and you're not expecting it, I about fell out of the bed. So I would like to see if the noise ordinance, the Constitution says you have a right to have, you know, basically freedoms and not impinged upon. If your neighbor does that, the Constitution doesn't give you that right. So I would argue that a noise ordinance is required in here to enjoy the country life. And noise follows the inverse square rule, so the farther you are away from it, inversely reduces the decibel. So I think there's a happy medium that can be found there with chainsaws and etc. However, we are, you know, high fences build good neighbors. And we recognize that folks actually have events on occasion, but when you have it every night, or it starts disrupting, you know, your ability to enjoy your property, I don't think that's very fair. So I know it's a tight rope line that you guys are walking, but not having a noise ordinance also is a challenge as well. Thank you.
Mr. Martin?
There's a limit to the noise you can make after a certain time. I mean, you can't have a knockdown, drag-out party next to your neighbor after 11 o'clock. I live in Hamburg, and they actually, we have a police department, and they'll actually come down to a lake. I live on a lake. The police will come down and tell you, knock it off, it's after 11, cool it down. Or they'll come back and give you a ticket. I think that a lot of this is because when the sheriff comes out, we don't have a noise ordinance. So if a guy's having a party all night, you can't do anything about it because he can't enforce it. And I think that's mostly what this ordinance would be, is to create a relief for people that have to put up with it. And according to that thing I gave you, a 12-gauge shotgun blast is 165 decibels. That's way too high. And it would kind of knock you out of your chair. But a lot of people are complaining about stuff that way, and I've been driving around with a decibel meter, and I got 3 of them on my iPad. You can sit in a parking lot of the school, and you're not going to hear over about 75 decibels. I don't care how long you stay. But if you go over here at playtime, you're over 90 at lunchtime. The kids out on the playground. So where are you going to go? It's a happy medium between the parties that people have to suffer all night for, and a noise ordinance like 80 decibels like Northfield Township's got. But the one you got in this one here is way low. You can drive down the road in the car and would be higher with your radio on normal than the ordinance, this ordinance you have. And there's three, you got commercial property. There's also industrial where you can make noise.
Bonnie?
A while ago, Linda said something about enforcing it. Are you going to have a new officer in the township to enforce this, an ordinance officer or something? We can afford it, I know, but why do we need to put in can I say a stringent, a stiff law like this to keep all us people who are not making a lot of noise with our heads down, scared we might make a lot of noise? Right now, my decibel meter says I'm going at 61, 62 right here, and you can hear me all right, but that's over your limit if I was out later at night. It doesn't get dark until after 10 around here. We all hang around outside if we're talking to our neighbors, and the other neighbor can say, oh, they've had some, call the cops. You've got to realize that you're putting in this law real tight, and then you guys aren't going to be in office. Gary might not be in office after a certain period, and the next guy coming in will have a bludgeon to bludgeon us to death with, or we'll have the neighbors will use it against another neighbor. It's just something you have to look out for.
Mr. Wells, did you have another question?
I think the intent of the current ordinance, which is somewhat different than the new proposed ordinance, is very, very reasonable. It says, the intent of this ordinance is to provide the township with an enforceable community nuisance ordinance that acknowledges Salem residents are entitled to enjoy their property free from unreasonable, loud, disturbing, or unnecessary noise. At the same time, respect people's right to normal daily activities without unreasonable interference. I think that's perfect. I don't know why, if you craft the ordinance around that intent, I think that is the balancing act right there. Allow people the right to use their property without loud noise, but not restrict your neighbors or somebody else from a reasonable use for their property. I mean, what's more reasonable than that? And by the township developing urban districts in our township, I mean, you look at Canton, you look at Plymouth, you look at these other communities that were rural like Salem at one time. And we'll go back to the shooting thing, the shooting and the hunting. And I'm pro-gun, I'm pro-Second Amendment, I'm a hunter. And but there has to be some reasonableness there. You have urban district. I mean, in our urban services district, where the more intense development of our community is going to be, or in a hamlet. How could it be reasonable if you're going to have shooting range there or people can target shoot there? I mean, does that make any sense? Is there any other community that would allow that? Shouldn't that be more restricted to areas where they're not disturbing other people? People that have bigger pieces of property where people aren't right next to them? We have Salem Township is basically all agricultural residential, but we have more dense sections of our township. So you ought to look at the zonings of our township and make a decision, maybe possibly based on that as well. And I spoke with a DNR officer too, and I asked him, because there was some question on if you could even regulate shooting ranges in Salem Township. And you can, because of these urban areas. Once they become, the zoning becomes so dense or so intense, you can restrict them from that area. That's what the DNR officer told me. Now that was just one sort, but it makes sense. How are these other communities doing that? So you need to take that into consideration as well. Thank you.
Linda, did you have another question?
Yeah.
Comment?
We heard earlier tonight where there's an individual in the room that wants you to limit the right to discharge arms. And I'd like to know from our planning consultant that Attorney General Frank Kelly has an opinion out there about whether the law does or does not prohibit a landowner from target practicing on his own property where other residences are within 150 yards, even though the target practice is carried on in a safe and prudent manner. And I'd like to know if that's somehow been overturned, because that opinion says you have the right to discharge, and it also says that the legislature has provided for the regulation and prohibition of discharge of firearms in townships by 1967 PA 159, the legislature has authorized the creation of a hunting area control committee and empowered it in the interest of public safety and general welfare to regulate and prohibit the discharge of firearms upon resolution of the township board that the safety and well-being of persons or property are in danger because of discharge of firearms. I'd just like to know if this has somehow been overturned, and therefore we can actually now start to impinge upon people's Second Amendment rights, the right to bear arms, the right to shoot their guns. And I was taught that the Attorney General's opinion is not law, but it carries a certain weight to it until it's been challenged in a court of law. And so if we're going to start to talk about whether we can or can't discharge our guns, I'd like to know how this opinion plays into that. Thank you.
She is correct. I had the state out for my gun range. You are able anywhere in the state of Michigan to discharge a firearm as long as you don't do it recklessly. Ed Plato has the paperwork for that. I'm sure you guys know that.
Any other comments? Okay.
Yeah, you need to look into the law, I'll comment on that for sure, you need to follow the law. But,
Well, Mr. Wellesley, we're going to follow the law.
but I asked you, how are other communities regulating this? You couldn't go downtown.
We're not going to discuss it right now, so not with you, we're not going to do the back and forth right
No,
now.
I'm commenting.
Okay, but I didn't call on you yet, Mr. Wellesley. So, just
Can
give me
I
one.
comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you, I thought you commented. You called on me, I should say. I mean, how are other communities able to regulate the discharge of firearms? And it's not about a Second Amendment right. Nobody's telling anybody that they don't have the right to bear arms. That's not the issue here. It's whether to discharge firearms in populated areas. And
They do it in Detroit all the time.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, I just heard a comment from somebody at the planning commission who said they do it in Detroit all the time. This is a little civic lesson now. In Michigan, a city has any right that they're not specifically told they don't have under law. A township has only the rights that are specifically granted to them. So there's a huge difference in what a township can do and what a city can do. And probably TJ could go to MTA and get you some information on that. But the powers of a city are vastly greater than the powers of a township. So there is a huge difference between the city of Detroit, the city of Livonia, and Salem Township.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Horton?
Is this the final,
Sure.
is this the final meeting on it, or are you gonna have
No,
a discussion?
no, I've got some things that I want to say. Well, I just wanted you guys to be able to state your case and your comments, and then just give me a minute. Once you guys get it all out, then we'll move on with the noise ordinance. But you know I don't work that way. I also keep you guys included. I'm glad you're here. Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Furman, do you have anything to say? No, you're good? Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna make some comments, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Paul. And my plan was, you weren't called on. Okay, and this is a very emotional issue. So once we get to our new business, I plan to have everyone, included, and we can do some back and forth. But I'm going to request that you please wait until you're called on, because these things do get out of control. Everyone has their own opinion, and they're probably all over the map. But I do plan on interaction in the back and forth. But please wait until you're called on. So, Bart.
I was just wondering where we were on the agenda.
We're just finishing up public comment, so I just wanted to let the public know with their comments that of course we want to, include everyone, but we have to have some semblance of order and respect, And if it's not there, then we'll just shut it off, and we'll just go about our meeting according to the rules, which will be, you know, all stiff and boring, and you all will sit there all mad and everything. So, let's move on
No matter what
with
happens anyways, if you wanna go shoot, you go shoot even with the
it.
ordinance.
Okay, we are going to the noise ordinance, okay. New business items, draft noise ordinance. We were handed this draft noise ordinance. Paul was handed this draft noise ordinance the last meeting. It is a draft. The request from us was to review and give us some feedback, give the board some feedback. So we're not implementing this tonight. We are going to review it. We're going to give you the pros, the cons, and I can say every single one of you had a valid point, and I agree with every single bit of it. And I would also like to say that one of my favorite lines here, I obviously didn't make this up, but it says, and this totally, it reminds me of Salem, but it also reminds me of this noise ordinance. And it says, more courtesies, being respectful, and cleanup equals fewer rules. That's kind of it in a nutshell. So when we don't have courtesies, and neighbors are disrespectful, and they use ordinances as retaliatory tools, it's a problem. If we could be more courteous and respectful to one another, and also have the understanding that as long as you have a neighbor, you have to work with somebody. If you have two neighbors, you gotta work with both of them. Unless you live out in the middle of complete nowhere, which we all wanted Salem to be, but it's not turning out that way. We have to get along, and there has to be give and take. So, also, rural living means some noise and odors from farming operations, etc. So, I just want to put that out there. I agree with all of you. There has to be courtesies, there has to be balances. What are we going to do with this draft ordinance? We're going to do the pros, the cons, we're going to give our feedback, and we're going to move it on. It might take more than one meeting, I'm thinking, because I'm thinking this is like the roughest draft, and this will be the roughest but most civilized meeting we've had over an emotional issue. And then, once we get, well, I'm sure what I'm anticipating are more questions, clarification, legal questions, legal consult. We'll need that. It won't be the first meeting, one and only meeting, not a one and done. That's what I'm anticipating.
That's right.
Okay. So, that being said, Paul, if you can kind of help explain how this came to us in some of these decibels, readings, and a little bit of understanding of the draft ordinance, please.
I'll give it my best shot. So I'll preface this by saying that I am not a sound engineer, so some of these things, some questions that we have, I may have to write down and go back and do a little research. So ultimately, we do have a noise ordinance on the books, which I think, as was mentioned earlier tonight, the intent is very good. But what we've discovered is that it's really not enforceable. Oftentimes, there are subjective words that are placed into these ordinances that are just that, they're subjective. You know, we talk about reasonable and unreasonable and things like that, and so you can put two reasonable people in a room, and they might have very different opinions about something. So ultimately, I and the township attorney were asked to take a stab at putting something together. So this was crafted based on language that is widely used in many different ordinances throughout the area. The reason that decibel levels are placed in these ordinances is because that's the only true measurement. Reasonable or unreasonable is not really a good measurement. And as somebody else noted, the intent is not to have something that, we're going to set an ordinance enforcement officer around every night to shut things down in a certain area or a certain time period. but to give people recourse. So, you know, obviously, somebody mentioned graduation parties. It's graduation season, you know, I think reasonable neighbors, respectful neighbors, if somebody's having a party that goes past 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever time you all end up deciding on is going to be the appropriate hour. If that's something that's going on, typically we would expect people to say, okay, we get this, they're our good friends, they're our neighbors, you're probably going to be at the party. But if somebody is living in a situation where their neighbors are having a party every Friday, every Saturday night, and it goes on to the wee hours of the morning, week after week after week, there's got to be some kind of recourse. And so that's the intent of this. And there are, you know, a number of different things that cause noise, cause nuisance. And so the intent was to create something that was defensible and could provide some recourse. And so between myself and the township attorney, you know, we took a model and these numbers that were based on other samples. And then we kind of went back and forth a couple of times to tweak some things and make sure that the language was at least, you know, it read correctly, the different sections that were kind of cobbled from different ordinances. And as Chairperson Merlot said, the intent was to bring it in front of you all, to have some conversation, to kind of run this up the flagpole and see what the reactions of the community were. We definitely want to hear feedback from the community. You as planning commissioners are some of the closest members to the community in terms of being able to, you know, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your family, and provide feedback. So this is definitely a starting point. And so I'll just go over a couple quick elements of this. Obviously, the purpose, the intent, and you know, if there are some language that we like from the existing one that we'd like to filter into this, we could do that as well. Sound beyond property lines is the next section, and really that's the key. I think somebody else mentioned, you know, the larger your property, the better off you are in terms of being able to make noise because sound dissipates as it travels. Maximum permissible levels. What I will say about DBA is it's kind of a graduated measurement. So when you look at you know, 50 to 60, it's not 10 necessarily. It's not the same as going from 40 to 50, going from 50 to 60. Because, and again, I don't understand the science behind it, but these are the tools that were dealt in order to measure these things. So if we have very specific questions about that, obviously, like I said, I can take those back and we can talk to some sound engineers and get the specific answers. The section number 5 that talks about mufflers and exhaust systems, that's all directly from the Michigan Motor Vehicle Code. So these noise levels, the language in here in particular comes from MCL 257.7076, which is already state legislation. The intent, as I'm told, of putting it into a local ordinance then gives the local law enforcement the ability to enforce it. So again, these were not numbers that were made up out of the blue. These are something that come down from state legislation. And then, because we put these definite numbers in place, obviously we have to have exemptions. So that's why this section is called exemptions, because there are certain things that we want to allow people to do. We want to allow people to carry on. Well, Section 7 talks about emergency situations. It talks about alerts. It talks about Section D is about parades, concerts, festivals, etc., which obviously we want to do, but it's, you know, those are not the norm. Those are exceptions because they are things that don't happen as often. Obviously, construction, repair, remodeling, etc. But then the time frame gets put in place so that there is the intent being, okay, we agree that this is a reasonable time when you know, noise will be happening. Again, lawn care, landscaping, maintenance activities. We recognize that these types of tools, mowers, snow blowers, all those things exceed the decibel level, but those are things that people are going to use in their normal maintenance of their home. I think it was a good point about snow blowers. I know I'm often up before the dawn using my snow blower, so these are things that I'm glad to hear brought up so that we can, make notes of those and figure out how we need to work that into the ordinance itself. And then, of course, there's a variance provision, so that if there are certain situations where there's a hardship, we put this variance section in there so that folks could go in front of the board and receive that variance for a certain time period in order to do so. With regard to the discussion on firearms, just as I'm not a sound engineer, I'm also not an attorney, so I would not necessarily care to weigh in on those particulars. I know that there are different rules, as were said, for cities versus townships. Charter townships have different rules based on their charters. So there are a myriad of different issues that filter into a community's ability to regulate the discharge of firearms. And so that's certainly something that we'll look into. I think I've heard a lot of questions already. Those are on the record. If you have other particular questions that you want to ask in that regard, we can certainly find answers to that. And then, of course, there's, with any ordinance, as I said, the intent was to create something that's enforceable, so then there's the responsibility, the notice section, and the enforcement section to discuss very specifically how these things would be dealt with and what the recourse would be. Because if you have an ordinance that's unenforceable, then it's really not worth the paper it's written on. So the intent was to create something that could provide relief in certain situations. Obviously, with any ordinance, we try to think of all eventualities, but that's why we have this open community process to work on these things, so that things that I don't think of as the consultant or the attorney doesn't think of as a consultant, we can bring those to light and work on them. So, as you said, this is a very first draft. It's not by any means the end of this process, and I'm happy to hear any comments or questions that you might have.
And who knows what's gonna come of this? I mean, I agree with what everybody said. All of us up here moved out here for the same reasons you guys did. Safety and security, peace, quiet, fun, freedoms, courtesy, respect, and it's just, the more noise you have, or the more rules you have, it seems like only the honest people are gonna honest people and the other people are gonna find a way around it. There's always gonna be somebody that finds a way around something or uses, you're 76.2 decibels, I'm calling the cops. And that is what we're all fearful of. Because we all know we do have people, a few, not many, that operate that way. But it's not just Salem, it's just everywhere. So we have your same concerns. I don't think anybody has brought up anything that the rest of us haven't already discussed in the past, in regards to the noise and the guns and the noisy kids or whatever. But I mean, it's like, how are we gonna do this? And honestly, I don't know. But we've been given this task. I'm glad you're here. We've got a variety of representation here from, because we've got the industrial area there, we got the residential, and they're all kind of coming together. So I'm sure we can find a way to just, let's just see what we come up with. Okay. So, would you like to start, Bart?
I'd just like to make a couple comments.
Sure.
To basically to everybody. Last month when I saw this, about fell out my chair. Okay? And then it was explained to me, okay, this is, and I understand Paul kind of has to put draft on this and title it a noise ordinance. But after it was explained kind of where this came from, I settled down a lot. And that explanation, I'll paraphrase, was basically, these are bits and pieces from a bunch of different noise ordinances from the surrounding area that we put together on one piece of paper so we had something to look at. It's not necessarily saying this is the direction that Salem Township is going, this is what we think is the right thing to do, now let's just tweak it a little bit here and there. And at that point I said, oh, okay. All right, and I was able to sit back down again. When it comes to decibels, unless you're,
most everything we read about is in dBA, and that's an adjusted, I'll say, amplified scale so that it can be relatively understood by the human ear. Because we're not a specific machine that can be worked at certain frequencies of sensitivity. Our ear is our ear. So that's what dBA basically does. It basically allows you to compare between other sound readings to what you're hearing. So dBA is what's typically used for noise ordinances, for what becomes objectionable to a person, like Mr. Horton said, for like OSHA, for like, what's safe, what's not. dBA alone does not help you. Saying, oh, your snowblower makes, your chainsaw 104 decibels, or this dBA. It's dBA at a distance. All right, so if you're the one operating the snowblower or whatever, that really doesn't matter. It's how far away is the person that is hearing it, that is objecting to it. So, and it does go down, exponentially, logarithmically, with the distance. So when we're talking about this, it's very smart that these things are in here at a property line. Now that property line obviously can vary from where the noise is, or at 50 feet. So we're going right by putting not just the units, but a distance on all of these things. So that's very critical. So yeah, a loud chainsaw in the middle of 200 acres, no one at the property line is gonna object, type of thing. A loud chainsaw right at the property line, that may come into play. So we gotta be careful to always put a distance in there. Along with the enforcing, I believe we have to also put in here, if anything ever does come to it, how to prove it. It's, is it going to be one person saying he made a loud noise, fine him? I tell you, that won't sit well with me. That's a he said, she said type of thing. And so that comes down to, a person, whatever, non-biased, measuring it, and then when it comes to that measurement itself, guys, there's so much difference in meters and what can be out there to read. Just the sensitivity of them, the size of the microphone, the orientation of the microphone makes a difference. Most dBA is measured in a vertical wave, so you're holding this mic like this as opposed to horizontally like this. Well, if you measure it like this and you're getting horizontal, now you're not getting the damping off the ground. Things like that. There's so much to be considered here on that. As far as cell phones and decibel meters, it's a neat little widget. It's an app. It's neat. It's good for getting relative stuff. I could sit there and go, okay, that chainsaw is quieter than that bird by this much dBA according to the app on my phone. Is it going to be something that is really true and accurate? As measured with professional instrumentation, probably not even close, and not even consistency, and not even consistent. These type of things have a sample rate that is like once every 3 seconds. It's not down to the 10th or 100th of a second. It's not going to get the peaks. It's not going to get the valleys. It's not going to get the intensity. So neat little fun tool, but not necessarily something you want to live by. That's about it. And just kind of a
Yep.
general working talk.
No, we'll be going through the line multiple times, I'm sure.
And I would just like to say, I think that was very nice of you to allow agenda items to be discussed during the public comment. And I hope that doesn't come back to haunt us, that we violated those rules and saying, oh, they allowed agenda items to be talked about in public comment. Oh, please. I think that was very nice of her to do that. Thank you.
We try to be effective, not,
We do.
if the rules don't fit the mission, well, then something needs to be done, so. Bob?
I think Mr. Walsey had a good point with the hamlet versus somebody that has 10 acres. There's some different factors involved there. But the problem with noise pollution is it's hard to enforce unless it's a constant noise. And who's going to enforce it? Ordinance officer is only work day shift normally. Police officers don't normally have decibel meters. So, standards are a good idea, but enforcing it, I believe, will be difficult to do, unless, again, it's a constant noise pollution. But I do believe the hamlet has some different factors than someone that has a large piece of property.
That's a difference, guys. I can't remember what year. I mean, I can look it up. Linda, I bet you know this. We used to have peace officers 30, 40 years ago. Now we have law enforcement officers. A peace officer could go up and say, hey guys, enough is enough, cool your party down, break it up, or I'm gonna fine you, maybe I'll put you in jail overnight, let your parents come get you, that type of thing. But now we have law enforcement officers. I kind of got to say, it's something America has done to itself. And it's unfortunate, because at that point, that made the transition between, hey neighbor, could you just give me a break this Saturday? I'd like to be able to sleep in tomorrow. Could you just hold off your range time until whatever. Yeah, okay, good. As opposed to, now you don't talk to them and you just 911 and here's the law and go find it. It's an unfortunate thing. And you know, maybe we could reel back on that a little bit with what we do here.
A lot of people, though, I agree with you, I wish it was that way, but a lot of people feel that it's the government's job to step in and handle neighbor complaints, which I don't like, but I like your way. I wish it was all like that.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of people that feel they're paying taxes and that they don't have to call their neighbor.
So my
The local government will take care of it, unfortunately.
So my second favorite quote is, your mother doesn't work here. We are a community. It's imperative that we talk to one another and try and work it out. And it's not easy, easier said than done, absolutely, I agree. But I'll just give you an example. I had a neighbor who was doing some millings coming in, you know, started at 10:30, 11 o'clock, trucks banging, tailgates all night long. Asked him to stop. Nope, not gonna happen. No, we're not doing it. So, not that this all came from me, but however, my point being, if he would have come over and said, hey Pam, I've got this going on this date, you know, here's a bottle of wine and a 6-pack of beer or something, or just had come over and warned me, where instead of, it was, no, tough bananas, nope, I'm not doing it, I'm not talking to you, and whatever, I would have gone out to my cabin. I would have, I don't know, would have stayed out later and come home with cards. I don't know, but instead I listened to it until 2 o'clock the next afternoon. I mean, I was willing to go work with them, but, and so that's where we get into the problem. But if somebody wants to blow their snow because they gotta be at work at 6 o'clock and it's snowing, maybe they got a pregnant wife who has to get out and go to work and they don't want her falling on her butt, that man is gonna blow his driveway and his dog, you know? So that's what we're trying to balance, I agree. Dan?
You know, this issue, this isn't a new issue. This has been attacked and tried to be solved in previous meetings in the township. I've attended a few of them. Maybe some of the others have attended them. It always gets emotional and they get nowhere. And I think the thing that we should look at here is to get right to the crux of it. What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to restrict people? No, we don't want to restrict anybody. We definitely don't want to restrict anybody. Do we want hard, fast rules? No. We want rules that give us a guideline so that if somebody is in exorbitant violation of another neighbor's rights, that we can do something about it. And I think what Bart said about a peace officer, we talked about an ordinance officer, part-time, whether it be Paul's organization provides that service, that their first mission is to go out and try to resolve the issue, not to come out and say, I'm putting a fine on you, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. To talk sensibly and try to resolve the issue. I think if we could kind of get to something like that, we don't want big restrictions. I know I worked, in my past work life, on a lot of contract language. A lot of it. And I always felt that the language was good to have there as a guideline for us, something to back us up. But really, I'd rather live by the spirit of the language rather than the letter of the law. And I think, you know, the good neighbor thing, we're a small community, it's like in our meetings here, it was discussed earlier. Pam has let people talk out of order, not according to the agenda, and it was done as a courtesy. But if people start violating that, then we need to go back to the rules then, because you're infringing on other people's rights when you do that. And I think that's what we need to look at when we're trying to approach this noise ordinance, is to find a resolve that when we get extreme violations, that we have some kind of tools to deal with it. And we would like to deal with it in a neighborly fashion, to talk to the people involved, and to try to find a compromise. And our supervisor has gone out and done this in the past on quite a few different issues. And he's found resolve, where nobody else seemed to, you know, everybody's fighting, you know. So I think that's maybe a kind of our objective. And then maybe we won't get so entangled up with emotional differences and arguing with each other and all that type of thing. We need to find ways to resolve have an extreme violation, because it's the amount of violations that are going to infringe on someone else's rights are really not very many. It's the exception. So we don't need to force all kinds of strict rules on people just because we have a few violators. We need to target the violators and try to resolve that. And that's my feeling about this issue.
Okay. My biggest issue is section 3. Following activities shall be prohibited if they produce audible sound. I just think it could cause an explosion and people that have a bone to pick with their neighbor, that it's audible. Like, I can barely hear that little boy in the basement playing a drum set. That means they're in violation and I can call. I mean, I have a neighbor who has race cars. And Fridays, Saturdays, late at night, he's 2 houses away. I'll feel my house kind of rumbling and I'll just chuckle. I'm like, oh, Joel's working on his car. It's okay. But it's only here and there and rumbles, but this is audible. There's a lot of things mentioned here.
Any other things that you have
That was
problems
big,
with?
you know, the decibels, we've been through this.
They're different all over
I
the
looked
internet.
in Canton, I have Cantons, Hamburgs, Plymouths, and Lyon Townships. Plymouth doesn't have decibels, the other ones do. Most of them are less than these. Hamburgs are allow more, so I don't know as far as the decibels. There's always going to be argument about that. Our old one in our zoning ordinance was less. I have rural and residential districts was 55 during the day and 50 at night. Business, special, and other was 62 during the day, 55 at night. I don't know. And the enforcement, yeah, I don't know how enforceable. Not going to be enforceable unless we have someone hired to do this.
I can't say that. I think about everything's been said already so far. One of our pluses is the fact that it's a nice, quiet community. But the downside of that is the noise carries a lot further. I mean, I can hear target practice a mile away from where I live. And I accept it as, this is the stuff that kept us safe and free all these years, guns, and I'm willing to accept that. And yes, I don't like it when my neighbor does it. He brings all his buddies over every Saturday and does it, but at the same time, that's part of rural living that we have to get over. And it's just, again, everybody says the same thing. How do we just stop those very offensive people versus this is part of our everyday rural living, et cetera. And as they said, the lack of white noise makes some of the stuff more pronounced than than maybe would be in the city. So what is very disturbing here might not even be heard if you live in the city.
I look at the ordinance, and I think, do we really need a big ordinance or just a basic one? Because we live on different pieces of property, like the people in the hamlet here. You can't go out your back door and shoot a rifle off. You're gonna hit somebody else's house because you're right there. But then you go out, like Linda's got the farm, 500 plus acres, you can go out there anywhere and shoot, and you're not gonna hit anything unless you're directly aiming at the, you see a house over there, I'm gonna see if I can hit the dining room light. Then you got people like Wayne, where he lives over there at Urban Services. We're gonna have something different for them people. He's got 10 acres, 5 acres, but I only have 2, and it makes me nervous to see the guy next door if he want to shoot his gun off. A couple doors up, they do it on holidays, 4th of July.
That's not addressing it on a noise level, though. That's addressing it on a safety level. And then there's laws for the safe discharge of the firearm and the responsibility.
If you have a basic noise ordinance, you don't need, how are you gonna encompass the whole township? Somebody that lives on 500 acres and say, well, you can't run a chainsaw.
I think Mr. Walton put it pretty darn well that, just starting with just one basic statement, what's currently there is probably one of the most powerful things. Simple as easy. When our kids were young, we didn't say, oh, you can't do this because of this, and then this will happen. These people react this way because they think this. We looked at it and said, don't be mean. Being mean is naughty. And boy, and that expanded into many things, and kids understood that.
Well, I just look at
power.
basic noise ordinances. I think that's all we need, a basic one.
Yeah.
It covers things, but you don't have to say it's 100% for the whole township because it doesn't work for the whole township.
But a phrasing like reasonable for the surrounding area. All this
But
stuff
that's
can be
my
up to
opinion.
interpretation and argued on so many levels. So, why try and meet every little bullet point? Make it general to begin with. And, something like reasonable for the area. Now maybe that can be applied to, 500-acre farms and half-acre hamlet lots. I don't know. I'm just guessing and speculating, but I don't see the strength in the detail. I see the strength in the generality, the essence of what it is. What are we trying to do? We're trying to let people sleep at night, at least on a regular basis. Every now and then, yeah, they may be up because of a party going on, or, race car.
Graduations, there's only one time of the year, and it's not like 12 months a year graduation party. 4th of July only comes once a year.
Was it, Penny, we said people will find a way. Okay, if I wanted to tick off my neighbor and snow blowers are allowed, and they reported me in, guess what? Someone may go out there and start their snow blower at 5 o'clock in the morning in the middle of August, and tell me, well, it says I'm allowed to run my snow blower. I'm not violating anything. I mean, there's going to be 1,000 ways around it if we make it highly detailed.
There's a courtesy. I mean, I won't cut my grass until after 8 o'clock in the morning.
There you go.
Because I was told years and years ago, a builder couldn't come in and start building my home until after 8 o'clock in the morning. That's a common courtesy. It's probably not a law, but it's a common courtesy.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I still today do that.
Yeah.
When it's 8 o'clock, boom, I'm gone. Sorry, my mower's running.
I go after 10 o'clock because then most of the dew is off it.
I don't sleep that late.
And I think we all agree upon, the current ordinance of Salem, it's great. What it explains is common courtesy.
Mhm.
The problem with it is it's not enforceable. The beauty of it is it allows for management discretion, or, whoever the enforcer is, to give some discretion.
Mhm.
The problem is, do they have good judgment and good discretion? So,
Let me ask this.
which gets us back to, let me just finish one more thing. So, which makes me keep coming back to because I know this sounds silly, but a peace officer. Maybe your mother should work here, because if you're gonna be a jerk and just run your snow blower in August, then they need to tell you, it's mean and it's rude, knock it off, but then,
Grab them both by the ear, throw them in the closet, you gotta say, come out when you get out.
okay, go ahead,
I
Dan.
think the emphasis should be on problem resolution. I think that's the whole issue right there, because most people are not impacted by this, or impacted to the extent that it bothers them. I have all kinds of things I can tell you about where I live, and I live with it. Just like Daryl said, I live with it. We've got a woman that has a monster truck, and I'm telling you, we have 5 dogs right next door, 2 houses next door, and they go at the fence and they will go for hours and hours at full blast at each other. And they're going 24/7. But I just shut the window, turn the air on. That's all. I'm not gonna, I don't want to get in arguments with my neighbors. You know, there's a lot of issues that you can find. But I think when there's extreme issues, it's really infringing on someone's rights, or they feel violated, there should be a resolve for that. We should have some kind of mechanism, whether it be somebody that goes out and kind of arbitrates the dispute, or something of that nature. You know, you get away from the language if you got somebody personally that goes and does it, much like Bart said about the peace officer. Go out there, talk to the people, somebody who has interpersonal skills, knows about constructional confrontation, and will get these parties to resolve the issue. And 99% of the time they will. And you don't need a lot of language for it, because the language starts infringing on other people that don't have a problem.
If we can't enforce what we have today, if we're gonna say, okay, you're the person deemed to go out and jump in the middle of this, then anything as detailed as this is just gonna be tenfold unenforceable. Because it's gonna be, okay, prove it. Oh, we don't need to show proof and things like that. You know, it's gonna be, it's gonna get even, it would even get messy, and you get bogged down by all of it. Guys, what are you doing? Don't be mean. Don't be mean. Be nice to your neighbor.
Paul, I was gonna say, hearing what they have said, hearing what the conversation, because we could talk about this for days. What, at least 2. Do you have any suggestions for direction on how you balance this, that you have seen in your experience?
Well, I think the point of enforcement is actually kind of, in my mind, as I'm hearing this conversation, the crux of what the issue would be, and just to speak to that existing ordinance being unenforceable versus a more detailed one being enforceable. The issue of unenforceability means that it doesn't have any legal backing. So at the end of the day, you couldn't take somebody in front of a judge with the ordinance that we have and be able to say that it's enforceable. Basically, it doesn't carry any weight. If we have something that's more detailed, the nuance comes down to then how do you administer it? Not the word enforcement necessarily, but how do you administer it? So, Dan mentioned having somebody who can go out and do some kind of mediation. And typically what I see in communities where these are effectively enforced is that you do have an enforcement officer, if you will, who is able to respond to complaints. The ones who are the most tactful are the ones who can keep an even keel. They don't take these things personally. They're charged with the enforcement of whether it's the zoning ordinance or a noise ordinance, and they're able to go and first of all, let people know what the rules are. Because if people aren't, kind of abiding by what our parents taught us were common decent behaviors about when you make phone calls, or how late you run the lawnmower, how early you run the lawnmower. If people aren't doing that, it's maybe because they weren't taught that by their parents, or they don't know what the rules are. And so oftentimes it comes down to the nuance of the way that things are enforced. And in my history, when I've done this as an enforcement officer being charged with that, my first step was always to go and talk to people. And oftentimes you can resolve things that way. Sometimes it takes a couple of times. Sometimes you have to send a letter. Sometimes you have to send 2 letters. And when those things fall through, then you have to have something that has legal defensibility behind it that you can be able to eventually administer, you know, something additional. Because sometimes the telling people to be nice doesn't work. And so that's why we have any of these rules in place. If everybody was just kind and respectful to their neighbor, we wouldn't do any of this.
I kind of promised you that I'd ask this question. Obviously, this is percolated up here in the township. And, you know, meet it where it's at. Don't meet it at all any unnecessary level. Can you name specific complaints here within, you know, X reasonable amount of time, 4 months, 6 months, or something, that have helped bring this conversation of the noise ordinance up? Are we dealing with 2, 3, 4 specific entities, or are we dealing with a Salem-wide plague of people being inconsiderate of their neighbors?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a plague, and I don't know that it would be appropriate for me to cite specific examples, but I would say that the examples are varied. So there are different issues, whether it be... You know,
Are they public record here at the township? Because I think, I honestly don't know. I would assume that they're public record. If it's a written complaint that's to the township, and it's public record, then it could be talked about without, you know, upsetting anybody or exposing them. I don't want to do that, certainly otherwise, but I'd like to understand. Are we dealing with...
I don't know what are official complaints, and I
haven't
haven't
heard...
heard...
playing with his jackhammer collection at 2 o'clock in the morning.
And I haven't heard all the complaints myself, but I think there's also the intent with understanding the community is growing. You know, we've talked about, even tonight, the USD, you know, likely expanding. Different areas have different needs, so I think...
Our census, our predictive census was in 40 years, we're going to have, what, 10 less families than we do now? You know, we looked at the comparison of all these townships around us, and
That's what
Northfield's
they
gonna
said,
double
Canton.
this. Yeah, and it's, we're not, we know we're not Canton. Lord, you know, they looked
You don't
at
want
Salem,
it.
and for some reason, Salem stuck out, and it's most likely because we can't get septic field approvals and things like that, that Salem was actually going to stay the same, if not tweaked out just a little bit. Do you remember what it was? Can we ask Linda?
Well, you know, we actually, just today, we were working on updating some of that demographic information for that chapter in the ordinance, or in the master plan, so actually next month I'll be able to provide you the updated specific details there.
Yeah, not too worried about whether it's growing or not.
Well, the show's thing, will blow that all to hell. We're talking almost 600 homes.
153, baby.
Yeah.
So as I said, I don't know, I have not heard all the complaints myself, and I'm not driving this.
Okay. I think, guys, if this is really getting to specific things, and we should understand what those ones are. Because for us to not include or discuss something that specifically addresses where the complaints are coming from, we're not doing our job. You know.
I don't know if it's gonna matter.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
Okay.
I think
now,
I'll go back to the point that the intent is to have some kind of recourse for people to find relief if they're aggrieved by some issue.
Okay, well then, maybe it's a person saying they're nervous that they don't have this recourse if if they have a complaint. What you just said, is it a person saying, I'm worried, and I don't expect you to know the answer, I'm just saying, are these a bunch of people saying, I'm worried if I have a complaint, I have no recourse to go through, I don't have a law to lean against? I doubt that very highly.
Bruce, did you have a?
Thank you. First of all, to piggyback on what Bart was asking, is there categorically, I know we can't discuss or mention, but there categorically something that stands out more so than others? You've got the vehicles, you've got some other things mentioned here, is it parties? Is there something categorically that stands out more than another or just kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that?
We have this gentleman here talking about the, people shooting next door. I mean, that's obvious one.
I get a couple myself, people complaining about the trucks over here too.
That's the biggest one.
Yeah, I think if you listen to the board meetings, you can hear a lot of that.
And then
And,
the,
and that's an interesting, that's an interesting situation over there, because that's zoned heavy industrial, is it called? Heavy industrial? And those businesses can go 24/7, according to the noise ordinance. Kalo put self-restriction on himself, right? He went and said, listen, I'm gonna knock these operations down to these hours on these days. He actually restricted his own business on when it could work, just to be a good neighbor. I thought that was an amazing.
I don't know if it's the same,
Yeah.
if he's still doing that.
Yeah,
Is he?
Yes.
Okay.
so it's,
But
a person came out here and bought heavy industrial land, have a business that, maybe to make a buck, they need to run. I'm sure they don't want to be out there running it when they have to run it. I'm sure they'd like to work a straight 40, something like that every week, but they're doing that so they can make a buck. And, that's kind of tough to.
I want to put it back out now, go back around and put it back out.
Can I finish
Oh,
this?
sure, I'm sorry.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So my second thing is, two things. The second thing is, one is, as mentioned before, noise is something that you got to catch while it's happening. So obviously we're looking for the things that are repetitive, long-lasting, etc., or consistent, like you're talking about cable or something like that, or whatever, versus the one night of, like they said, they were courteous enough to ask you whether it was just a one-night thing or a one-night, one-day thing or a part.
That was years
So
ago.
back to that, is there a way to maybe run this language around, this long-term offensive noise and obviously various level, minimum restrictions, and then having some sort of an opportunity for, if residents don't want to necessarily knock on their neighbor's door and ask them, is there a way like we can get a burn permit, or other burn permits for a year, but is there a way we can call the township and say, we're going to have a party for our son who's graduating, and it might go beyond this, or whatever it is, and some way of maybe allowing someone to call in and being able to get that, so to speak, that variant. And then obviously the most important thing is, how do we get more educational on this whole thing as opposed to, being in long arm of the law, but more, hey, do you know that this could be offensive to your neighbor? Just putting out a little more educational stuff in our, not only in the ordinance, but also in the upfront part of the ordinance, like being respectful of your neighbor, but also in our website, anything else that would help reduce some of these complaints and increase the respectfulness of our neighbors.
Well, and one of the things I mentioned to Paul was, my former work life, when, in regards to like sexual harassment, somebody did something bad. In order to qualify for that, to be called that, it had to be severe, pervasive. So not just like a one-shot deal. So I think that's important. We're talking about being, respectful. We have people, somebody that shoots guns near us too, but it's just, 20 minutes, half hour? So it's very respectful. So that's something definitely that needs to be included, is something that's excessive, like Dan advised also.
I just like to say, when it comes to permits and things like that, I it's all up for discussion. I view those as kind of like you're just buying a get out of jail free card. You're paying for a permit, or getting a permit, so you don't get an infraction. The noise is still going to bother the neighbor. The net result to the neighbor is the same. You're having a party till 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, we got a permit. Go pound sand, neighbor. I got a permit. That doesn't help the situation. That's now what it comes back down to is, hey neighbor, did you call the guy next door and tell him you're going to have a party? Yeah, you really should have done that. That would have been a nice common courtesy. It's going to keep circling back to that, guys.
Sometimes our neighbors are a little far apart, and
Yeah.
again, if I want to be courteous, maybe I don't know that I'm gonna touch all of our names, just, again, if there was a way of saying, hey, you know.
Sure.
And then you have to do it so far in advance, and maybe someone can call that neighbor, you know, again, if you're too shy or whatever to knock on a door, can we act as, rather than trying to be an enforcement officer, can we act as more or less the peace officer, trying to, let me call that neighbor for you and see if there's a problem with that. I have a neighbor that I can't get to them, because I've knocked on the door, I've done everything I can, but they're medically unable to answer the door to my knocking, and I don't have phone numbers wherever to get a hold of them. I'm hoping the township has a means of getting a hold of these neighbors.
No, I understand.
Oh, Jim, sure.
Yeah, I just want to get back to, there was questions on enforcing these noise ordinances. There's been mention of ordinance officer quite a few times, and I just want to remind everyone that I've owned multiple homes in multiple states, and I know from personal experience, when you disagree or you argue with an ordinance officer, he will or she will take it personally. It's human nature. Thank you.
Okay, now, having all that, I want to go back to you guys and have some say, if you have something that you liked you heard, something you didn't like, or a suggestion. Bonnie?
I didn't like that I have to ask permission to have a party at my house. I think the permits and the permission is something that should be, that's like, you gotta raise your hand and I'm not back in school anymore.
Best parties are spontaneous anyhow.
Beg your pardon?
Best parties are spontaneous anyhow. Mr. Holmes, we're going to hear from you.
I think you should set your goals small. You're trying to, first off, you don't have an ordinance officer. So writing anything for somebody who doesn't exist is a waste of time at this moment. The one person that you do have that can enforce anything is the sheriff. So you should focus on what those small issues are that he can address. Number one, parties. Number two, vehicles being loud. And keep it short at that. And when you do get an ordinance officer, then you can come back and maybe adjust it again. When you have somebody who is receiving the complaints, can tell you what the problem is and what we need to do about it. Otherwise, you're wasting your time on trying to enforce something that nobody's going to enforce. So just stick with the simple. Try to solve a couple small problems. Don't try to solve all the problems.
And it's interesting you said that, because I thought when you guys were talking about just the issues, could we always add to the ordinance if we needed to? But the problem with the ordinance as it is, I had trucks that were very loud. They were running right up and down my neighbor's, bedroom window and all that for 14 plus 15 hours. And the police said they could not do anything about it.
That's where you have a couple specific things probably. You got,
And this was a few years, this was like
you got
3 or 4 years
parties
ago.
and you got vehicle noise can be very, somebody revving engines or working on a car way too late or whatever. And then you have, I guess at some point, probably the hardest one is going to be for you is how do you deal with the discharge of firearms issues?
Yeah.
So, if you could just solve 3 things instead of trying to solve 50 things, you're farther ahead.
That's a great idea. I like it. Okay, Mr. Horton.
You're gonna have to do something, because you got all those houses up down in the district, 583 or 500. So you got people move in, you got nice quiet people, suppose the rowdy people move next door. You can almost throw a rock, hit them. So you're gonna have a battle in that district. And so something has to be done as far as a party here. How long can you have a party?
Yeah, they might have their whole separate set of rules down there.
You got 11 people, most people say 11
Elm
o'clock.
Association.
I'm thinking an association should have their own rules.
Yep.
They just keep it in their little neighborhood.
We'll just push that on the next planning commissioners and the board,
Maybe
let them
you
deal
stay over
with
the
it.
city.
But in Hamburg, you- 11 o'clock, you have to cut it down.
Sure, and I'm just teasing about that, just. Linda?
You shouldn't be teasing, because that's how it should be handled by a homeowners association. We have homeowners associations in the areas now, many of the areas that are what we consider subdivisions here. Wilderness Pond, for an example, where the former supervisor lived, has a homeowners association. They have very restrictive rules. You could not, if we had a summer that was full of days like yesterday and today, you could not have an above-ground pool, because their association rules say it has to be an in-ground pool. So it absolutely is the way to handle some of these issues for the USD, is to let it be handled uniquely by those people, instead of trying to enforce on the entire township, and those of us that live on 500 acres, what people who live on 90-foot lots need. So that is, don't discount that, that's a good way to do that.
I wasn't joking about that, I was joking and pushing upon the next planning
Okay.
commissioners,
So
by the time that comes in.
a couple other things that I heard is you don't want to restrict people, you just want guidelines. And I don't understand where this came from, and I know you guys keep telling us that this is just here for discussion, but there's no reason to bring something this restrictive forward. I think your mindset of the planning commission needs to be, when you're handed a document, that it should be a legitimate document, worthy of the engagement of our time and your time. It should be something that, in which you can move forward. It shouldn't be something that is so egregious that we're all in agreement it doesn't fit Salem Township. I think you need to be very careful about moving forward with these types of things. Bart made a comment about you run the chainsaw in the middle of your property. A lot of times the tree that's got to be taken down is on the property line.
Yeah.
It's
on the
not in the
property
middle of
line.
your property.
Yep.
And so you're gonna run it on the property line. The DNR has an interesting decibel policy. They, particularly in the Upper Peninsula, they enforce that a snowmobile can't be above 88 decibels, 13.1 feet away. So that says I'm on a trail. It doesn't say I'm not gonna hear it if I live up there. But it says if I'm very close, you know, what they're trying to do is make sure that they have appropriate mufflers and stuff like that. But it's very specific. And we'll use snowmobiles. My husband and I, before we had kids, at midnight, we would go out and snowmobile in the middle of our farm. It was heard at the property line. My kids, when they were young and foolish, snowmobiled at night. It's the most beautiful time to snowmobile. You have a moon, you have the crisp white snow, there's no cracks in it. Again, to say that you can't have any noise at the property line, you can't have any noise at midnight, and to say that we need to call the township to inform them when we're having parties, when we're gonna have noise. I wanna reiterate, the township only has authority to be involved in those matters that a specific statute or section of the state constitution provides the township to be involved. So, you're talking about a logistic nightmare if the township's gonna get a call that we're having a party, or that somebody's, at my house, parties just happen anyways, people show up and you end up with people there. So I think, again, that, I think you guys are headed in the right direction, but I think you need to be very careful on this. Most people moved out here because they didn't want a police state. They didn't want to be told that their camper has to be down in the self-storage place on 6 Mile or on Chubb Road. They don't want those restrictive regulations that they have. And to some extent, if that's what they want, let them move back to where they came from. Why somebody moves out here and they think that they should impose on their neighbors their preferences is ludicrous. So those are just some thoughts I had as I listened to you talk. Thank you.
And I just want to comment on this. Linda, we're not taking this lightly. We have no intentions of doing anything with it. We've been given a task, and we're absolutely going to do something with it. But where it goes from there, if that's not quite on us, that's going to the board.
Well, this is a board, what currently exists, and it is a nuisance ordinance, and contrary to what Paul has told you, I was on the board when it was adopted, and the attorney and the planner sat right where Paul is saying, and they said it was enforceable. And the reason that we have what we have is, if we don't have decibels, is because we were told that the very first thing that happens when you go to court and you start to talk about a decibel is the instrument calibrated correctly? Does the individual have the proper training to know that, and can you prove that the instrument was used correctly? And so we were told that, as I think Daryl said, that common sense was a much more legitimate way to approach it. And so I find it interesting that your current council and your current planner tell you it's different, and that's fine, because life is different. It doesn't make it right or wrong. But that's why there is the current nuisance ordinance, because we were told you can't have decibels. They're thrown out of court. And my son is an inspector for another community. If you don't have continuing training and so many hours of it, the courts today, if you come in to say, I'm an expert in this area and I'm going to testify, they throw it out. Doesn't matter that you have all the credentials if you're not up to date on your training hours. And so I'm not so sure that the decimal does anything any better for us. Who's going to be able to demonstrate that the instrument's calibrated correctly, that the user knows what they're doing? And again, I appreciate what you wanted, because that's what the original nuisance ordinance was to try to do. It also was to try to not criminalize noise, but to do exactly what you said, to give the township a tool where people could go out, somebody from the township, and we did at the time we have an enforcement officer. They could go out, they could meet with two neighbors, sit down and try to come up with a workable solution.
Mr. Walsey.
Yes, I agree with much that was said tonight. It was just, you just discussed possibly in the USD allow the association to solve the problem, basically self-regulate themselves. I guess if you're going to do that, you might as well throw out our entire ordinance book that we have, almost 150 pages. You guys might as well go home too. They're going to rely on the township with some ordinances and some ordinance application, I guess, in that regard. I have had some issues with shooting on my property, and we have been able to work them out to some degree. But you can't discount the health, safety, and welfare part of this whole issue too. And that's your number one job right there, health, safety, and welfare. If you look at the decibel ratings, this gentleman was gracious enough to give me a copy of them. And I brought a copy myself, but not OSHA. But they talk about sounds at or above 85 decibels can cause hearing loss. And then you look at jet engine at 100, 12-gauge shotgun blast at 165. It says even short-term exposure can cause permanent damage. That's at 140 decibels. So anything over and above what can cause any kind of hearing damage to you, I mean, you can't ignore that fact. That's your job, is to protect. Those are extreme examples, for sure.
Guys, this is exactly what I'm saying. A shotgun blast 160 dB is standing right next to the shotgun, most likely slightly downrange from it. It's decibel at a distance. It's decibel at a distance.
Not 150 feet away.
I understand.
Yeah, just so
I understand
when we look at that, you
and
know,
that's why
unless you're shooting it right at the property line, which really isn't allowed anyway, you know.
if you're shooting at the property line, and there's other things that add in. There's certain situations that the leaves are on the trees, there's a lot more noise that reverberates back. There's a lot of different situations that can cause that. It may not be exactly 165 decibels, but it could be 120 decibels at your property that could cause severe damage. What if you have children out in the yard playing, like this gentleman has children out in the yard playing, and could that cause damage to their ears? You can't discount that. Those are extreme examples.
Agreed.
Understand that. So consider that as well.
Okay. Anybody back there? Public?
We're waiting for a permit to talk back here.
What's that?
We're waiting for a permit to talk back here. Usually it's just a permit. There's not one person in this room who wants to get it from them.
Yeah, and I think, yeah. Well, the one thing about when you have a plan, I don't know how you all work as individuals, but nearly everyone else I know, when they have a plan, here's my agenda, here's my job, it never goes as planned, it changes 50 times. So it's part of, it's a process to weed out, you know, we got something going on, and my husband will say, why would you do that? And he goes, because of this. And I'm like, oh, that was a dumb thing to say. I wish I never did. So it's just, it is process, and it comes and goes. But the more ideas we have in here, and the more words and whatnot, you feed off everybody else, and it helps. And it helps.
Sam, when me and Mr. Walsey here had an issue over guns, right?
Yep.
We fought, but now we get along fine. We have a working relationship. You can work things out with your neighbor without ordinance officers. Am I right, Wayne?
Yeah, and I agree with that. I've always taken the position in the beginning to go speak to my neighbor. But not everybody does that. And there's certain reasons. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. For whatever reasons, they don't do that. So then that's why the planning commission has to come into play in that regard for the people that, well, Mr. Begary just said he didn't want to cause any conflict with his neighbors over there, and he just rolls up his windows and forgets about it. I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong. It's just probably a lot of people. And then go back to the shooting. I've heard people say about the shooting, and nothing about you, is the fact that if somebody's shooting, do I want to go over there and confront somebody that's got a gun in their hand? They forget about it, or they just, they're not happy with it. So for those people, that's why we have you.
Mr. Rockwell.
Thank you, ma'am. So, just a couple issues. I think the chicken and the egg situation comes here first. We have an ordinance, but we don't have enforcement. We've got deputies that work 80 hours out of the whole week. In order to have some type of enforcement, you have to have someone that's there. And the majority of the time when these are problems, we generally don't have a deputy on duty. That's the first issue. The second issue.
You know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
They work set schedules. So basically, the times you just alluded to, they're pretty much not here during that time. But
Okay, so you're talking specific incidences?
Yes.
Are we talking the shooting?
Well, so let me.
Because I've asked the question about specific incidences, obviously you know of some.
Yeah,
And
so I
you
do.
know when they
Well, you
happen.
live in the township, right?
Yeah.
So like Mr. Vergari says, there's some things you adjust, right? My neighbor was complaining about my dog barking in the middle of the night. So what do? You close the door and you don't let the dog out. So we work that out. The challenges is that you have to have, first, for example, for the ordinance, I believe, you have to have some way to enforce it. The current ordinance doesn't have a numeric scale that you can stand in front of a judge and say they either were definitively in or out of the ordinance. It's subjective. So, and DBA is only one way of a sound meter to measure. DBC is actually a much more effective way of reading sound, especially when you have a pressure wave from trucks slamming in the back of trucks. And I'm glad to see that was discussed, at least in the technical side, because there are other weighted scales than just DBA, which everybody gravitates to. The second issue is not having any ordinance. It goes back to Mr. Walsey says, is that then it becomes the wild, wild west. We don't have any recourse if you have someone that's egregious. All of us agree when you have the party or the graduation, that's a one-time event. But when you have houses that are every Friday night or every Saturday night, or they come up and they're running their lawnmower. You run yours at 8 o'clock. My neighbor runs their lawnmower at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And my daughter's got to go to school in the morning. So there's got to be some balance in here. And oftentimes it's judgmental. And that's where the deputy comes in. It typically comes in and brokers a peace, if you will. The challenge is, though, you don't have anything in the books right now that's enforceable. If you look at it, it says noise at the edge. Well, that's gunshots for me, because my neighbor doesn't live any farther than this. He's not 500 acres. He's an acre, about an acre and a half. So he's shooting literally, like 20 feet from my window. So I'm not anti-guns. Nobody here has probably got, as gun pro as I am. What I am is having the ability to enjoy a reasonable expectation living in the countryside. If you want to, do your chainsaw because you're cutting at the edge of my property, I get that, but you're not doing that all day. And when you said that, somebody's running trucks from midnight to 4 in the morning, we're gonna have a little discussion there, because unless you've pre-organized that with me, you know what, my car broke down in the middle of the road. You're gonna have to figure out how to get around that. That's ridiculous. It's good neighbors, right? And that's a one-time shot though. But if you're running trucks, because people are complaining about the trucks down here, the slam of the trucks, you can hear it all the way here at the town hall. Ask somebody that lives there how much noise they have to put up with. There's a lot of people complaining about that. There's no easy answer. If there's an easy answer, we would have done it. But I think you're at least having the discussion and having the common sense to have that discussion is at least the first step. I don't know there's a simple answer.
Linda.
A couple of comments. We heard there's a lot of people complaining. The last time we were in a meeting and there were a lot of complaints about something, when we looked into it, there were like 3. So I'd like to see documented evidence provided at the next meeting of all of these, a lot of claims. Because that's a
That was
pretty,
not the statement.
that's a pretty loose word. There are a lot of claims. I just heard it, I'll listen to it again on the tape. So I'd like to see the actual claims that are coming in where the township gets it. Then I'd like to talk about the duties of a planning commission, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of what your duties are. You're not all things to all people. You have very specific duties set out by law. And so I don't think that you're the recourse for every problem in the township. You deal very specifically with the zoning ordinance, with the growth management plan. I don't know, maybe this is part of the zoning ordinance. But I would caution you, and I shared this a long time ago, that I was given one good piece of advice when I was a township treasurer, and that is do not take on battles that are not yours to fight. And the last time I shared it, there was a gentleman in here who was upset about his road. And you guys were
I'm sorry, Linda, upset about his?
His road, the dirt road in front of his house. You have no control over the dirt road. It's in the purview of the Washington County Road Commission. That advice is don't take that battle on. And again, I'm hearing tonight where neighborhood association rules are made because people do live closer together than they do out on 2-acre lots or on 5-acre lots or on even larger tracts. They are a good thing. That's how a lot of things are controlled. It's a good way to do it. Don't discount it. But again, a lot of people want you to do a lot of things. They got a problem, they don't know how to resolve it with their neighbors. They want someone to step in and do it for them. Do your job, and I'm not telling you whether it is or not your job, but my advice is don't take on things that are not, that you don't have to. You can't win.
One thing too, just want to make people aware of, there are condo communities here, and they act much like the association. They have their rules, what you can do, what you can't do. You sign those agreements when you buy the house, and they have a board and everything that administers those rules. So that's been going on for quite a few years here in the township.
Anyone else?
250 feet away, the train horn is still at 90 dB. 1,000 feet away is still at 80.
Do you ever hear the train over here at your house?
Oh, I hear it at my house.
All the time, right?
1,000 feet away, a train horn is still at 80 dB. 250 feet away, it's at 90.
Alrighty. Anyone up here, have anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm gonna wait on the call.
You have anything to add right now? Okay, old business items?
We're done?
Oh yeah, do I need to close this?
No.
Okay.
We're done?
Okay. Well, not yet, hold on. Old business, none. Reports of commissioners and correspondence, board of trustee. Okay. ZBA?
We had one applicant last Wednesday that wanted a pole barn. but it was on his property, but he was, where he wanted, had to move it over to the line closer, only because the both side properties, the water went to his property, so he couldn't help the guy, give him the 15 feet that he needed to keep that building out of the area that gets water in the springtime of the year, so the building's not sitting in a puddle of water.
Right.
That's the only applicant we had, and there was absolutely nobody but him sitting in any of them chairs.
Okay. Land preservation and conservation?
Nothing new.
Okay. Chairperson? I think I said everything. I think everybody's pretty much all on the same page. We had some good feedback. Thank you to everyone for coming and contributing. Certainly appreciate it. Zoning administrative report, absent, or did she give you anything?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
We had 2 new home permits issued. One temporary structure for a temporary mobile home while a house being constructed after fire. There's 1 deck, 1 patio, 1 remodel, 2 new roofs, and 2 accessory buildings. So a little bit of building activity. Obviously, in the summertime, things pick up. So.
Yep. Okay. Approval of the minutes for May 21st, 2018.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of May 21st, 2018 as submitted.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes of May 21st, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Public comment? Is there anything left?
Thank you for listening to us.
Oh, I appreciate all your input.
Did you guys ever do get an ordinance officer? Maybe you should adopt one in the township of Salem. Not from anywhere else, but a person in this township. Because I honestly believe that anybody that works in this township should live in this township.
Are you applying? Are you applying?
I would take the job, but I'm not gonna do it to piss on other people's neighbors. You see what I'm saying? There has to be a
That's
very
right. You want me to
fine
read
line.
my more courtesies and being respectful line again?
Hey, if I can work it out with that guy, I can work it out with anybody.
Okay,
All
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Mr. Horton,
Exactly, I got it.
your comments on at previous meetings about traffic and that, I see tonight we got a message from Northfield Township. They want to change property from AR to office research and research development on 5 mile between Ridge and Napier.
There's a sign up there.
They got the signs out there, so it's coming, like you said, that we'll be hitting the pass-through traffic on the east end of the township.
Between
They've already sold
Between
one.
Ridge and Napier on 5 Mile, on the north side or the
Yeah.
south side?
North side.
North
Oh,
side.
God
Hey,
bless
Darryl, isn't that
America.
supposed to be 8,000 jobs?
What's that?
The
They don't say in that how many.
For the prison was that?
That's on, that's.
Because remember there used to be a little RC airfield, those guys met there and flew the radio control airplanes? And they got shut down by the neighborhood. They complained about the little engine. Oh yeah, they complained about that, got them shut down.
Meeting adjourned at 9:08.
God bless America.
So you know, Mark, I went to the garbage meeting, right? And they had all the people from those homes there in Northville.
You went to the what meeting?
To the garbage, they have like a garbage.
Advance.
Every month, yeah, every month they have this thing so they can cuddle these people, pass the by and make them feel good.
Stop you.
The